Welcome to Phoenix and Flame, my podcast about pushing through and transforming even when you feel like a pile of ash. I'm Dana Skaggs, a psychotherapist known as the Queen of Boundaries. If you are new to Phoenix and Flame, please subscribe so you will be notified of new episodes. Visit Dana Skaggs, DanaSkaggs.com for a free quiz to discover how boundaries are impacting your life. This podcast is not intended as psychotherapy. If you are in crisis, please call 911 or contact your local crisis hotline. Welcome to Phoenix and Flame. I'm Dana, and we have an amazing guest with us today who has already demonstrated a very large amount of patience with technical mishaps this morning. Reverend Dr. David Chotka is with us today, and I cannot wait for you to hear from him. But first, I want to explain a little bit. So, Dr. David Chotka has 4 degrees, with 3 in theology and spirituality. He is the founder and director of Spirit Equip Ministries, a trans-denominational equipping ministry focused on developing spiritual disciplines. And his dad drank himself into despair before finding sobriety. Reverend Dr. David Chotka, welcome to Phoenix and Flame.
Well, thank you. I think the flame is now burning. So for those who don't know, it's about 20 minutes trying to navigate what happened with sound. So that's fine. But we're going to do this. And I have a little pad on the other side of this interview. So we're going to be fine.
I'll tell you one thing. You just have to, the tagline for Phoenix and Flame is pushing through and transforming, even when you feel like a pile of ash. And I think Dr. David and I this morning had a little bit of time of just kind of pushing through, and we didn't stop. We could have, but we didn't. We persevered. Also, I want to point out that, David, you have co-written a book with a $1 million best-selling author, Dr. Maxie Dunham.
Yes.
And the book, Healing Prayer, God's Idea for Restoring Body, Mind, and Spirit, was just published. It was November of last year with Whitaker House.
Yep.
That also speaks of the intertwining of medicine, miracle, and mystery.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about your story, and I'm so interested in what you're doing with your life, and also how you began, because that's kind of the premise of Phoenix and Flame, is seeing how people, what it felt like for them to be in the ash, what the pile of ash felt like for them, how they came out of it, what helped, what did not, and ultimately what they've transformed their life into.
It's funny you should ask that. Just before this broadcast, I was going to do some review to get ready for this interview. And my computer screen popped up something I wrote in 2018. I went to Recents, and it was a 2018 thing that I wrote, but it described how my father came to a place of sobriety. So it's interesting you should say that. And I wasn't even planning on that. I was looking for another document, and this, you know, how you call up Recents, and you can see Recents. And for some glitch on my computer, speaking of glitches, I found myself reviewing that story, and it actually intertwines my dad and me. And he was somebody who suffered much in life. So when he was a little boy, he was kicked by a horse, and he was like 6 or 7 when his jaw broke because of this horse kick. And my grandparents were both Ukrainian immigrants to Canada. They didn't have any education. They were living in small town somewhere, in the middle of Manitoba, in the prairie, and there wasn't much there. He was the youngest of 14, and his second oldest sister had gone off to Winnipeg to work, and she came home to visit mom and dad, and there was her youngest brother lying in bed almost dead. And she got him to the Winnipeg hospital. They barely saved his life. But he lost a significant amount of vision and muscle tissue, so he could not move his eyes back and forth ordinarily. What he had to do was to move his head to be able to see in a different direction. And he had Coke bottle thick glasses all his days because of the infection that went in and wrecked his optic nerve and so on and so forth. Anyway, that experience caused him to not believe in the goodness of God at all. And then people took advantage of him because he had to drop out of school in grade 3 because he had to walk up to the front to see the board, that kind of thing. And he was embarrassed. So he worked with his dad in the farm. And of course, his dad by that time was old. His dad was a violent man. He told stories about his dad chasing people, jumping over a cow with an axe in his hand to get people out of the yard because he didn't want to see them, that kind of thing. And so
Wow.
she left in the 1930s when nobody left. And I have a picture of my grandpa, a picture of my grandma. My grandma lived to 104. My grandfather died when he was young because he got emphysema from smoking too much and drinking. So that's
Mm.
the background. My dad grew up, a separated child, in a rural place where he had suffered much with health, and he did not believe in the goodness of God. And so I had an encounter with faith. I met people who believed, and I discovered there were actually very loving, kind, gentle people all around.
That's
So
nice.
but he couldn't believe that, because he had been shafted by business associates. He wound up having a company that he founded taken away from him. And then my mother saved the day. My mother opened up a restaurant, a diner that had 5 apartments attached to it. And so I grew up in that context, and we met many, many, many fine people who'd come into that restaurant and shoot the breeze with us and laugh and talk. And over the course of time, my dad healed. When he would go into these fits of despair, he'd drink himself into oblivion. And there came a moment where I was called, and my call was intertwined with him. So I'll just tell you this: I was not planning on telling this story, and I wrote it in 2018, and I haven't looked at the story since until today, just before this call, when I was looking for a different document. So here's what happened. My dad would vacillate between being an agnostic or an atheist. And when he was the atheist, he would say there is no God. There can't be because of all this terrible stuff. And by the way, we had family and friends who were in East Ukraine when Stalin executed 7 million Ukrainians, starved them to death when their crop was there. And the reason why East Ukraine has Russians in it is because Stalin starved the farmers, and if they tried to take their crop off the field, he shot and killed them. And so it was an artificial famine. And that's why, and then he transplanted Russians into the Ukrainian territory. And that's why that region is Russified. And so now, from the 1930s all the way to the present day, there are Russians who were born in that land for 3 or 4 generations, and they think the land is theirs. And the Ukraine thinks the land is theirs. And so that's
Mm.
why this war is going on. And Putin wants the land back. And so anyway, my dad had friends there and family there, and they're dead. They're gone. So he could not bring himself to believe in this goodness thing. And as a result, when people shafted him and treated him poorly. Now, the interesting thing was the sister who saved him ran a strip joint. Got that? Okay.
Okay.
So in my life, the hero was the lady who ran the strip joint.
Oh,
She
wow.
saved his life. And so I become a Christian. So, and actually my dad's two sisters had husbands who ran the strip joint. And so I was
That's
surrounded
awesome.
by this stuff all through my childhood. In fact, I married a nice, kind, sweet Lutheran girl, who loved Jesus and decorated Christmas trees. And Luther invented the Christmas tree. He's the guy who brought it inside. I don't know if you know that.
I did not.
Well, here's what happened. He was poor, and he married a nun. And so a nun and a monk married each other. They had no money. He had a little stunt named Hans. And so what Luther did, he wanted a present for his son, but they had no money. And so he brought a tree in from outside and said, the tree is evergreen and it points up. And so he said, just like eternal life, the tree points up. So it's a beautiful little thing. My
Yeah.
wife grew up with that story, and she would sing little songs around the Christmas tree and decorate it. And me, I decorated the Christmas tree in the strip joint. That was required. And then I became a believer. And the smell of sex and beer and smoke just became absolutely vile to me. And so when we got married in August, and she wanted to set up a tree. I said, never, never, I'm not going to do that. So, I mean, these funny childhood background things, just going back and forth. So this is the background. And so I remember times when my dad would break himself to sleep, and he would weep and turn into a kitten, or he'd get really mad and violent. One of the others, one or the other. Anyway, he could not bring himself to believe. And I remember the time when I was called, and here's how it happened. I was standing by the refrigerator late at night one night. And by the way, I just read this, standing by the refrigerator. And I said, Dad, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. All of my marks are within a percentage. I don't have any passion for one area, except auto engines. I flunked auto engines. I'm never going to be a mechanic. And he laughed. And then he got a sparkle in his eye. And there were good moments, too. And he said, well, son, get yourself a good sleep and you'll know in the morning. They would give you a pat in the back, and I went upstairs and I laid down in my bed. And I woke up the next day and I knew I was going to be a pastor. And so I didn't tell anybody. I just got up and I went to the school and I got a hold of the guidance counselor. I had 2 spares at that particular window in my school history. And he said, what denomination? I said, oh, I don't like my church. He said, try mine. And it was somebody from the same denomination. But it was an English guy who smoked a pipe and blew smoke rings. Talked about Jesus with his feet on the desk. Just this, it was just so endearing, so charming, right? And this guy blew smoke rings and talked to me about faith, And he wasn't one of these guys who would beat you up because you smoked too many cigarettes, because he was smoking a pipe.
He was smoking a pipe.
So anyway, I'm sitting in this office, and he said, well, and he had an English accent, so I liked the English accent. He said, now, lad, you need to bloom where you're planted and blow smoke ring. Go back to your church. They love you there. If you want, you can come here from time to time, but look, you need to bloom where you're planted, So I booked in the next morning to see my parents' pastor. And this was a guy. He was what I call visiting Sam. His whole ministry was knocking on doors, and the church was next door to the hospital. And he would spend his days in the hospital visiting people and then connecting with them. And he really was one of these guys who would show up when anybody was sick. He was a terrible preacher. Oh,
Well,
he was bad.
let me pause you for just a minute, because I'm trying to understand, with your beginnings, with your
Yep.
dad being, vacillating between being an atheist and agnostic, and then growing up, in the strip joints and being around that environment and that type of thing. How is it that you feel like you thought, I'll be a pastor? Where in the world did that idea even get planted?
Well, let me tell you where it came from. This story actually involves my dad, and so here's what happened. I'll finish this part, then I'll segue back to his part, and this is where the stories two connect together. So here's the reality. So I go to see this other pastor the next day. He was a guy who'd show up in my parents' restaurant, and he would visit with all the customers, because it was 2 blocks from our home to that church, and there was a hospital next to him. And he would visit people in the hospital. He'd come to my mom and dad's restaurant. He would always show up. And here's what this guy did. If anybody in my family, and he didn't care what the background was in trouble, at 2 a.m, he would go to their home and sit with them if they were in trouble. And he'd bury their dead, and he'd marry off their kids, or whatever the issue that he had. So he was one of these, and he was a terrible preacher. Oh man, it was just bad. He was a great visitation pastor. So I'll just tell you, after I went in the ministry, I could not preach the prodigal son for 10 years. Because every second Sunday he preached the prodigal son. The Good Samaritan was on the other Sunday. I couldn't preach that one either. So I was so tired of hearing that. Getting back to this. So I go to this. So I see this pastor. He says, you're going to the ministry. I said, how did you know? He said, I've been praying about it for 6 months. You're supposed to go in the ministry. Our church is 100 years old. This is the 100th anniversary this weekend. We have not had a candidate for the ministry in years. You'll be our centennial candidate. I'll put your name forward tonight. And then there were 3 committees that ordinarily met over a period of 2 years. They all met in the next 2 weeks. And I passed all the committees and I was launched. And so I walked up to my dad and I said, Dad, I'm going to, you remember that? And we were mopping the floors, and he had a cigarette in his mouth, and he had a little glass of whiskey there, and he was having his glass and mopping the floor. And I said, well, Dad, remember the time we were standing by the fridge a couple weeks ago, and you said I should have a good sleep? And he laughed. He said, oh, yeah. Did something come to you in the night, son? I said, yeah. I am now launched. I've gone through all the committees. I've not just made an inquiry about what I want to do. I'm going to be a pastor. And I've gone through all the committees, and I've been accepted by the board at Westminster Church. It's done. His jaw dropped. He turned white as a sheet and began to physically shake. He had another shot of that whiskey, and he said, we have to talk. I said, okay, Dad, let's do it. So we finished cleaning up the chores, because we had to wash the fans and wash the floors. That was the routine. And our house was next door. So he walked over to the house. We sat down. Nobody else was home. I have 2 brothers and my mom. They were all out for whatever reason. And I looked at my dad, and I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, remember that night?" I said, I'll go to bed. You go to bed. You'll know in the morning." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I walked into bed. Your mom was already asleep. I lay down, and I was closing my eyes, and the risen Lord appeared to me in the doorway of my bedroom."
Your dad said
My
this.
dad said this. Now, he was an
Who
agnostic or an
doesn't
atheist.
even
That's correct. Now, in the Bible, Jesus appeared to Saul of Tarsus when he was about to kill Christians.
Mhm.
And Balaam's donkey saw the angel. so, so you don't have to be a believer to have an encounter. Okay. So, in fact, you
Yeah.
could be antagonistic to being a believer and have an encounter. The
Mhm.
king of Nineveh hated Jews, and he repented at the preaching of Jonah. I mean, you have these kinds of things going on. And getting back to this, he has this encounter. He thinks it's a strange dream, but he feels compelled. And the Lord spoke to him and said, "The following things are going to happen to your son David. He's going to be a pastor. He's going to be a writer. He's going to travel. He's going to be a minister of the gospel. Wake him up. Ask him what he dreams. Ask him what he dreams. And when he tells you, confirm what he has said, and then tell him I'm calling you." So my dad, in this kind of dopey, dozy, half asleep, half awake kind of thing, went upstairs, tried to wake me. I had two brothers. We all slept in the same room in those days. And he couldn't wake me. And so he thought, this is the strangest dream I've ever had in my entire life.
We're-
This is nuts. What am I doing?
What am I
He comes
doing?
back down the stairs, goes back to bed, shaking his head because of the stupidity of this thing, because he didn't even believe in it. He closes his eyes, pulls the covers up. As he closed his eyes, whether his eyes were open or closed, the Lord reappeared to him, walked over to him, set him on his feet by grabbing the pajama things, said to him, "You're going to have to go wake your son. You did not wake him." He said, "Go away." So he's telling me this. He's telling me this as he's physically shaking and turning white as a sheet. And he's hardly able to mutter this thing. He's hardly able to say it. And he goes back up the stairs. He shakes me awake, and I don't have a memory of this. I was groggy. And he said, "David, what are you dreaming?" I said, "Oh, Dad, I'm with Jesus. He's telling me I'm going to be a pastor. He's telling me I'm going to travel to all the continents on the earth. He's telling me I'm going to write. He's telling me I'm going to be a preacher of the gospel. And this is how I am to serve him." And then apparently my dad told me a bunch of the things that the Lord had said to him about what I was going to do. And then he said, "Jesus has told me to tell you you're going to be a pastor." And then he went back to bed, and he woke up the next day and said, "I don't think that happens." So, didn't say anything to anybody. And then I did my thing for 2 weeks and got accepted by the local church, by the elder board, by the three committees. One was a psychological test. One was a theological interview. One was a practical interview about what I did for my faith, et cetera, et cetera. These three different sets of teams, all of them involving seasoned
In
pastors from
two
across the
weeks.
region, all done in 2 weeks. And
That's
I was
amazing.
launched. And so and I wound up going to seminary, et cetera, and it got paid for by so listen, the bottom line was, he had never seen anything like that before. And actually, I didn't talk about this for years because most of my buds would say, "Clan crazy has arrived." This is not what you do. And when I got ordained, just before I got ordained, my dad looked at me and he said, "You can't have a drunk for a dad if you're going to be a pastor. So I'm giving up the bottle." And then he gave up smoking, and he gave up the bottle, and he broke all ties with anything to do with that strip joint. And and then he had another encounter where he said yes to Christ. And that story is another amazing moment. So if you want to hear that one, I'll tell you that one.
Well, I do, but hang on just a moment because I think people sometimes, and to your point earlier, they do have these encounters, but they blow them off. They feel like, I don't understand what happened. This makes no logical sense. People are going to think I'm, like you said, clan crazy. But I think it was really neat that your dad and had this together, that it
Yes.
corroborated your experience, corroborated his corroborated yours. It
Yes.
wasn't just a it wasn't just a one-off thing.
No, but then it was also corroborated by the church. I mean, and the pastor already knew. I mean, this kind of, there was all these different things that all came together all at once. It started with a guidance counselor who sent me to a church, who sent me to a different church, and the pastor of the different church already knew. And he was praying about it already. I mean, this is, And then these teams of people who were, and it was a Presbyterian structure, and in that particular denomination, there were the presbytery, that means elder. Presbyteros means old guy. So it's the council of the elders is what that means, right? And presbytera is a female, older lady, but regardless, the word Presbyterian comes from elder. And it means that you have a gathering over a region and elders in a local church and elders from across the region gathered together to make decisions. And that's how that structure works. And so all these people were from all different churches from all across the region. And all of them gathered together and they all said, yes, you're in fact called. And that's how
Wow.
the thing started.
Now, let me ask you this and pause for just because you mentioned in your biography, because I wanted to bring this up about your wife and also your daughter, because people that are listening, some of them will be Christians, some of them will be, seekers, some of
Yeah.
them will be, agnostics or atheists.
Or antagonistic, yes. And I don't
Yes,
like that.
I
Yeah.
want everyone to feel that's why I'm very real with my questions and I hear very real stories when I'm a psychotherapist. And so I walk with people through down all kinds of journeys.
Yeah.
And you said that your wife was miraculously healed of FSH muscular dystrophy,
Yes,
but your daughter, who has the myotonic dystrophy, was not healed.
that's correct.
And I really like the fact that you have both represented because some people will say, well, sure, you say it's healed because Jesus did this or Jesus did that. Well, why didn't he heal this person or why didn't he heal that person?
Well, the other side of this is my wife's mother and her godly sister and her niece are all afflicted with FSH muscular dystrophy. It's genetic. And even though they're godly, they're not been healed. And so even my own family, we got this question mark around this whole thing. My son just got married, and my wife's two sisters showed up. And one of them is very, very, very much in a wheelchair, hardly able to move. And my wife was running around the backyard after she was having this decline. And we had this big party.
Yeah.
And she's able to run up and down stairs if she wants to. She couldn't when this thing happened. So let me tell you that story because it's
Yes.
but you're right. I live between medicine and miracle industry. The overlapping ages is how I describe this. We're already participants in the powers of the next age. We're not yet finally arrived. We have not yet get to the place where everything is as it should be. And so we live in a fallen world with medicine and miracles side by side, and disease and violence and despair side by side. And of course,
Mhm.
you know my background now. And you know that I lived in violence and trouble and sin and all kinds of nasty stuff. And the Lord intervened and didn't take me out of the nasty stuff. He asked me to be a transforming agent inside it.
Mhm.
And that's how the same thing. So right now, as we speak, the founder of Lululemon has been diagnosed with FSH muscular dystrophy. And so now you can read about him. He just made a huge donation to the Muscular Dystrophy Association in the United States because he wants to see a cure come because it's afflicting him personally. And the things that define the syndrome, it won't kill you young, but if you damage a muscle, you never get it back. You start to have your muscles hollow out inside the abdominal region, and you have difficulty being able to stand. You can't raise your arms above your shoulders. Your facial muscles sag. Very often, scoliosis happens in the back, and your two shoulder blades go out of position between 16 and 20, and then you start to have chronic pain and dizziness, and then it's a plateau decline kind of disease. And so if you want to find out about this, it's now hot on the press because about a year ago, this guy who is famous, is actually a Canadian, lives in Vancouver, but he founded Lululemon in the States. And now this company's big, he's made lots of money. But he shuffles when he walks. He can hardly get himself up a step. If he wants to go up a step, he had to put two rails on each side. You have to lift your leg with one hand, balance it, then lift your other leg and balance it, and then take your next step. And that was happening to my wife. And so we were in a house with an upper bedroom and bathroom. There was a bathroom on the main floor as well. And she was going through that kind of a routine when she was starting to walk up the stairs. Now, parallel to this, I received a phone call from two American congregations in my denomination. I'm Christian Missionary Alliance. And these two denominations, one in New York and one in Atlanta, said, we want to go to Uganda. We want to help Uganda rebuild. Would your congregation join us? And I met the overseeing guy, the bishop who organized 750 to 1,000 pastors to get an education. They had been in a war zone because of two characters, Idi Amin and Joseph Kony. And when I went to that place, I met people with their hands cut off and their noses cut off and their tongues cut off. This child soldier thing, that was where it was. And this horrible man, Joseph Kony, was kicked out of the country through a strange and marvelous, how do I say, symphony of events, where 300,000 Christians would gather in the streets of Kampala to pray when the Ugandan army took on Kony. And when the 300,000 prayed, the Ugandan army would win. And when they were not told and they didn't pray, Kony would win. The soldiers would become terrified. They'd drop their weapons and Kony would resupply. And so there's a video called The Unconventional War that talks about this. But I met one of the pastors who organized this grand prayer meeting with 300,000 people in it. And actually, I was preaching about that story in Vancouver, and I told about the 300,000 intercessors, and a man's hand went up. He was a Ugandan, and he had been in the streets of Kampala in that prayer meeting when Kony was defeated. It was the most amazing juxtaposition of events. I told the story, and there was someone who'd been on the ground in it when it happened. Anyway, I wanted to invite that. But my church spent $500,000 over 3 years to help educate those pastors in the north. We were in the city of Arua, and our intention was to help the helpless. And so we would pay for them to be fed and to travel and to receive whatever resources they needed. And my first book, this one, was written to train them. I wrote this as a training guide. It's called Hard Train. It's going to be rebooted. I've just got the rights back, and I'm going to turn it into something we can use for Americans and Canadians. But I didn't write it to write a book. I wrote it to help the Ugandans because they had nothing. And so, we went there, we gave those books away, and it was a lot of money spent. And my elder board looked at me and said, "That's a lot of money. Could you bring the guy into our church so we could meet him?" And, we said, sure. And over the course of time, he came. Now, it was a funny time for him to come. He came in February in Alberta. Now, it was minus 40. And it was plus 40 Celsius in Uganda. So 80 degrees Celsius, what's that? 112 degrees difference Fahrenheit. I'm not sure of the number. So he leaves tropical Uganda and he shows up in Spruce Grove, Alberta in minus 40. He put all these clothes on himself and he's trying to preach. And here's what happens. I did it in conjunction with another church in town, so it split the cost to fly the guy and so on. Anyway, the fellow spoke at I had a congregation of 802,000. And we had three services, Saturday night, Sunday morning at 9, and then 11 o'clock. And he came to Saturday night. And he's telling these amazing deliverance from death stories when past people were praying and the 300,000 people, bullets missing the soldiers, and all this kind of stuff. Everybody's on the edge of their seat with the war stories. It's amazing. And so they walked up to me and him and they said, "Tell us more stories. We're coming back tomorrow at 9 o'clock. And so I said, well, don't use the same message. And he didn't. He changed his message. And that next morning, we had all of the Saturday nighters show up for the 9 o'clock. Of course, it was an overfull sanctuary.
Standing room only.
Well, that's what happened at 11. Okay, so at 11, they texted their friends, and all these people came, and it was a sanctuary that could accommodate 450, and we had 650 people there, and we had overflow into the back area. There must have been 1,000 people. And they were lined up along the wall, and I was actually sitting on the step next to the pulpit because there were no chairs left. And my wife was 2 rows from the front. Now, remember, she has FSH muscular dystrophy. She cannot raise her arms higher than her shoulders. And she is losing the ability to be able to even do something as simple as vacuum her up because her body doesn't work the right way. And there were friends in the church who had come alongside her and would help her clean the house and do ordinary things. And we had guests who'd come to visit us from Vancouver because they wanted to know if they should travel to be with this guy for the next event, because we did 2 things. We always did a build project to help them create infrastructure, and I would train the pastors, and that's how it worked. And so there were people who were skilled at carpentry or bricklaying or whatever, and they would come and do something. And we built a library, we built a latrine, we built a little school for them. And then I taught these 752,000 pastors, and then we gave them the books. And so anyway, this guy was coming and he was telling these stories. And he's you know how a story works. You get to the climax and you wait for the moment where the extra thing happens. And he got to the climax and he was about to tell the extra thing and he stopped. And he looked at me. And he said, in his thick Ugandan accent, and I'm sitting beside him, and I'm getting baptized as the spray is coming. He said, David, what is M.A.? And I said, M.A.? I don't know, Master of Arts. That's what I said. And he said, no, something's wrong. And he put his head in the pulpit. He left his head in the pulpit, and it was a long, long pause. And he was in the middle of this story, and the story had not yet reached its conclusion. Everybody's waiting, you know. And then he looks up and he says this. Remember, he's a Ugandan tribal. He's lived in a war zone and he's not received enough education. He says it's a wasting muscle disease. It starts in your head, it makes your face sag, it goes down into your back, and your spine is curved. Your shoulder blades have been out of position since you're between 16 and 20. You've had chronic pain and you're dizzy. And he gave this perfect description of FSH muscular dystrophy. And I'm looking at my wife because I know that something is happening here. And then he said this: whoever has this, Jesus has just healed you. And her arms went above her head for the first time in decades. Her friends were watching her because they were sitting together. Her arms were above, all the pain in her body vanished. Now, we had company from out of town, as I told you. We had them staying in our home because they were trying to figure out if they should travel. And our plan was, after church, we would bring our guest speaker, and all of my guests were there. And then I would go to the top shelves and take down the heavy pots and pans so that she could be able to cook whatever she wanted to for all the company. And she pushed me out of the way, and she stood up on the step and she started taking down the heavy pots and pans herself. And we were, all of us, in awe because she had not done that in decades. Now, a week later, there was a funny moment that sealed the deal for me forever. So I got my daughter, I got my son. And my daughter is always gentle, sweet, and kind, but for some reason, she wasn't that day. She was obnoxious and she was rude and she was pushing every emotional button that my son had. she was trying to make him mad. My son was doing his level best to be kind and gentle because it's a little sister, right? And he's doing his best and he's about to lose it. And I'm about to lose it. And I'm just ready to discipline my daughter when suddenly my wife stood up and she stomped her foot. She'd never done that. And she said, "Jessica Joy Chotka, that's enough." And she took her by the hand and she ran her up the stairs and got her beside her bed, made her make her bed, made her pick up all her toys, made her go into the bathroom, brush her teeth, ran her down the stairs, got her in the van, and drove her to school. We were so mad. Took us 3 hours to realize my wife had run up the stairs. And she had knelt beside my daughter's bed and made her pick up all the toys and got up unheeded. And then she ran back down the stairs. Our medical doctor had been working with her for 5 years before that moment to give her adaptive therapies to alleviate pain and to help her do what she needed to do. And he waited 3 years because he just could not believe this. And then he wrote the doctor's note and said, all traces of FSH muscular dystrophy have vanished from this woman's body. Not there.
Wow. So let me, and I know our time is pretty much up, but I did want to quickly ask you, in conjunction with that,
Yeah.
your daughter has not
Yes,
been healed of
that's
hers.
correct. And
And
so I
what
avail myself of much medicine to do this. So we work with her at every way. And right now, I'm just very thankful. I live in Windsor, Essex, in Southwest Ontario. They have a marvelous care system for people who are afflicted with any kind of disorder. And they have been great help to us, all marvelous help for us. And here's the reality: when I can't tell you the number of times I prayed for my daughter, and I pray every day for her, but I've not seen. I have no sense in my spirit that this is going to be alleviated. Now she's joyful, she's content, she is full of beans, she's happy, but she's not healed.
Mhm.
And so my life is bracketed by those two realities. And I do believe in miraculous intervention, and I do believe in pathway to a remedy, and I do believe in holy mystery. And you cannot manipulate God. You can only cooperate with him. The way I describe it in the book is God initiates and we respond. And what I do in the book, and what my co-writer, Dr. Maxie Dunham, does in the book, is we talk about the signals that God sends when you're about to enter into some sort of miraculous act of power. And we talk about what it's like to experience extreme disappointment when something does not happen. We talk about pathways, being guided to a pathway to a remedy. We talk about holy mystery and this mystery of suffering and so on and so forth. And in the end, we say there are basically 5 pathways that happen to every believer in their lifetime. There's the instant cure. There is natural healing. And I didn't used to think that was miraculous, but I'll tell you something. Before my wife was healed, if she damaged a muscle, it never recovered. After she healed, ordinary muscle growth happened to her. So now I see ordinary healing, where you cut your finger and you wash the wound and you put a bandage on it and it heals. I see that as a miracle too. There's this pathway to a remedy where God guides you to someone who's done 20 years of medical research. And they have discovered that this alleviates pain, or this is a therapy that can lead you to a better place. That's a gift. Take it. The next one is holy mystery suffering, where you don't know the reason and there's no answer. And the last is the majestic crossing, where you come to your purpose on earth is done and you go to meet your God. And I see all 5 of those as legitimate. All 5 of those are legitimate pathways for people who are in the midst of trying to understand how they are to walk with their God, walk in faith, and know how to do this. And so we've developed a 200-page book that teaches people all 5 of those and includes stories that revolve around all of those things. We have several instant heal stories in the book. We have several gradual heal stories in the book. We have miraculous events that did not involve either Maxie or myself, because we don't want to say this is something that is rooted in who we are. This is something that's rooted in who God is. And so we talk about those seasons where there's partial recovery and then no recovery. We talk about those times when we're guided and we don't seem to come to a place of conclusion. And then when it's all said and done, we wrap it all up in that description of 5 different pathways. That's how the book works.
That is wonderful, David, because I know that people tend to say, well, if God doesn't heal everybody, there must not be a God.
Or
So
there must be a reason. Maybe you're a nasty sinner. You slime bucket of a creature.
you slime bucket. So I'm glad that you take that time to go over those different areas. Now, what I have is spiritequip.com.
That's right.
Is that where you want my listeners to go? Because I know they're going to want to know more about what you have to offer and the books and more about you. Is that where they go?
They go to spiritequip.com. So it's Holy Spirit, like Holy Spirit, and it's equipped like equipment.
Okay.
Put those 2 words together without any, all small caps, no dots, and just small letters, .com. And there you can see links to the books. You can see links to courses that I do. You can invite me to come and do a 3-day event in your local church or event, whatever. I do events as well. Okay. And I do about 1 of those a month, because I can manage that. If I do more than 1 a month, I get really tired. So or sometimes I'll cluster 2 if they're close geographically, something like that. But I say to churches is, pay my airfare, give me a place to stay, and take up a love offering, and I'll come and teach in your church. I'd love to do that. Fabulous. And what I just done with this book, actually, I prepared 15 videos. It's going to be released by the group that started this whole process. It's called JourneyWise. They published through Whitaker House, but they developed 15 10-minute videos. And what I do is I summarize each chapter and give a little story in each of those 15 videos. And you attach the video to the 15 chapters of the book. And there's a discussion guide. That has just been done, and it's going to be finished in June. The final product will be done in June. Now, I'll put that on my website as well. But you can get this book anywhere books are sold. It's available as an audio book. It's available as an ebook. It's available as a trade paperback. And now we're going to have these videos. And that's going to happen in about a month. That's right now at the time of recording. It's April, but I know when the recording is going to go out. But in June of 2024, those videos will be free for anybody to be able to access them by looking at JourneyWise. That's journey like a travel, and wise as in wisdom. JourneyWise.com, and they have something called Servant School. And those 15 videos will be part of the Servant School. What I want to do is to cluster those on my website with the book, and to put that also on my Amazon account, and make sure that people can access both at the same time. But that's the most recent writing, and it has to do with the fact that I live between the times. I live between heaven and earth. I've dealt with the fact that there's this fallen thing called disease here, and we cannot escape the ravages of what it means to be a fallen human. And I have a miraculous God intervening kind of faith, where the Lord intervenes in time and space and sets up opportunities like this to be able to talk to people across the earth about his power to heal and save. And I believe that these are always supposed to be together. In fact, the whole New Testament hangs together in what I call the already not yet. We're already participants in the powers of the next age. We are not yet as we should be.
I love this.
Every book in the New Testament talks about that. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, all the way through to the end, already participating in the powers of the next age. Not yet,
Not
as we should
yet.
be.
So, Reverend Dr. David Chotka, thank you so much because you clearly are a wealth of experience and wisdom and quite prolific, I must say, in what you are producing in the videos and your books. Thank you so much for spending your time and your wisdom with my listeners on Phoenix and Flame.
It's been a joy to be here, and actually, I think it was a divine appointment because I've not read my dad's story since 2018, and so I think I'm supposed to publish that. But I'm thankful that the Lord juxtaposed our situation to make this work.
I love it. And we persevered. We
We did.
persevered despite the technical stuff.
Yes, we
All
did.
right. Listeners, I know you have heard so much today that you're thinking, woohoo, this is awesome. I know the exact person that needs to hear everything that Dr. David Chotka has to say. Take the episode, take the link, copy and paste it in text, copy and paste it in email, put it on your favorite social media sites. Let's get the word out. Let's grow our Phoenix and Flame community so that we can reach out and we know that we are not alone. I hope you've had a wonderful day. I hope the rest of your day goes fabulously. I'm Dana on Phoenix and Flame.